All right, everyone. Welcome once again to the Faces of Business. I'm your host, Damon Pistolka. And yes, I have to move the microphone in front of me so it sounds good. Wow. I'm happy to be here back from a long holiday weekend. And I'm so happy to have Steve Heumann here with me today from Superhuman Productions. Steve, welcome.
Thank you very much, Damon. I'm very excited to be here.
Yes, we're going to be talking about telling your story with video today because you are the man when it comes to video. I mean, you got some experience not only in video, you've got experience in writing, production. I mean, just so much stuff. It's going to be great to uncover this today.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about some storytelling stuff and just why it's so important, and hopefully I can convey that sort of excitement for storytelling, because for me it's almost like breathing. It's that important.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Well, let's start. Let's start. Tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, and what really, your background, what really intrigues you about film, what in video and producing videos, and also a little bit about your writing.
All right. Well, when I look back on my life, even when I was a child, I was always a storyteller. I remember getting my sister's tape deck. This is in the early 80s, right? So this is like 83, 84. And she had her tape deck, and I would put the tape in and I would record stories, and they would be superhero stories. And, because that's what I was interested in and what I'm still interested in.
Yeah.
But I would literally do that as a 4 and 5 year old. And when I was a teenager, I always wanted to get into some type of storytelling, whether it was writing or film, but I never felt that it was like a possibility. Like, I didn't grow up in an entrepreneurial home.
Yeah.
It was always very safe. You get a job and whatever. So it was always like, well, I can't do that. You can't do that. That was what I had in my brain. So I went to college, went to university, and studied, and thought I would go into radio, because I had a radio show at the University of Utah where I was studying, and I needed an internship to graduate. So I was like, well, I'm gonna apply at the radio station. Well, I was looking up internships, and my wife actually found one at a television production company that I had never heard of, and I was like, okay, sure, why not? It's an internship. Well, they ended up getting back to me before the radio station did. So I took that internship and I started
Yeah.
working at a production company that produced television shows. And their flagship show was an outdoor adventure show. And I started out, just an intern, and then I got hired on freelance doing writing, and then I got hired full time, and then eventually, after a few years, I was running the show, and I ran that production company for 15 years, just producing a weekly show, at least one every single week. And I ran all the teams, and it was really cool. It was crushing because you had so many different shows, but man, it was amazing. It was an amazing opportunity that taught me everything about different storytelling techniques and about art and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it was the ultimate sort of petri dish for creativity, is what I would say.
Wow. I bet it was. I bet it was. We'll get back to that a little bit. So you're also an author,
Yes.
and tell us a little bit about that. And I mean, because a lot of people like writing, but not very many people write books.
Well, see, I think that everyone wants to write. I think that human beings are storytellers. I think that's one of our main aspects, is that we tell stories. We love to have a good story to tell when we've got people around us, right? You want to be able to tell some cool story that happened to you or happened to somebody else, and see that look on people's faces. And so most people just don't. They either don't have the skill or the time. But I know tons of people who want to write books. Well, being a storyteller, I always wanted to write novels, and I wanted to write novels about what I enjoyed, which was, science fiction thrillers, kind of like Twilight Zone, where, it's about something, but it's about more than what it's about. I always gravitated toward that, even as a kid. Well, after I've been working for this company for 15 years, my wife and I just kind of realized that it wasn't what I wanted to do anymore. The company wasn't going in the direction that I, felt that it should go. I felt very trapped and stifled creatively. And so we decided, what would be the ultimate thing if I could choose? And I would say, well, I want to do the video work that I enjoy. And then I want to write my own stories. And so that's what we decided to do. We took the leap. And we started Superhuman Creative. We started the business, and I split my time to this day between writing science fiction thriller novels and doing the video work that I enjoy. And writing the novels has been so freeing. It hasn't been easy because, they have to be professional, they have to be edited, they have to do all that stuff. It's not like you can just pump it out and send it out into the world. It's got to go through all the different processes in order to, meet market levels and be good. But I love that challenge. And, I was secure enough in my storytelling ability that I was like, okay, let's just do it. I'll take the critiques, I'll take the hits. We'll revise as often as we need to. And then we'll figure out the business side of it, because it's a totally different business model than anything else I'd ever worked on, to make money as an author. And so it just took a lot of just dedication and not giving up. But I think that, you'll know this as a business owner and an entrepreneur, anybody who's been through that, you go through those times where you're just like, geez, this is the most difficult thing I've ever done. Why am I doing this? I should just go get a job because it was easier. But I think it's those moments when you can make it through those and you get a couple of days past that and you're like, okay, I'm not freaking out now. Everything's going to be fine. The more you do that over the first few years of your business, well, then eventually you succeed. That's all there is to it. You just don't give up long enough to figure it out, and it works.
I'm going to write that down. You don't give up long enough. That's a good one.
Oh, dude, because I remember those. There were days in that first, year and a half, 2 years where you just felt like crushed, like everything you tried just failed, and so then you feel like a gigantic failure. But then you look back. At least that's what I did. Is I would look back and say, okay, when we started this, we felt really good about it, and the only way that I can fail is if I now quit. And after that, and that was the funny thing. Like when I first started the business, I was very much like, oh, well, if it doesn't work, I'll just get another job, no big deal. But after like a year, you're kind of getting the mindset of like, well, I don't want to work for anybody ever again.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. And so then when you get that mindset, suddenly it's okay, well, now I can't because I don't want to. I want to see this move and succeed. And so when it came to the books and the video, that's just what it came down to, was kind of taking those lumps, rolling with the punches, and eventually coming out the other side and going, okay, well, I've got this kind of figured out, or I've got it figured out enough that I can see where the river kind of shifts and moves, and that what works today might not work in 6 months, but I've kind of got my hand on the wheel enough that I can move it. So it's been very, very fulfilling, especially when I go to conventions and things and I'm selling books. Every time I sell a book, I get excited. Every time, I'm selling online and one of my box sets goes, digital, and I see that, it doesn't matter. It's like you get this thrill. It's like, oh, someone likes it. And then when someone leaves a review, you feel like $1 million. Just like, oh, it's something I created, someone really enjoyed, and that makes me happy. So yeah, it's been pretty cool to have that balance between those two sides of the business.
That is no doubt, because I was just talking to somebody yesterday. In fact, they had written a business book, and they were telling me about their promotional schedule. They're going to go on like an 8-month promotional tour around the United States with their book, signing books. They've got special people going to be at each book signing, and there's a whole business behind promoting your books once your whole processes and things. That's really, really intriguing. That's for sure.
Yeah. And it takes more than a lot of people think when they decide to write their book. I was in that place where I was like, well, I wrote a book, so that means that everyone's going to like it. And once you kind of understand, okay, that's not the case. Just because I create something, A, doesn't mean that it's good. And B, it doesn't mean that anyone's ever going to read it, even if it is good. And so you have to take that business mindset and go in and say, okay, if I'm going to continue writing, that means I've got to make money writing so that I can continue writing. And if you go into it with that mindset, then you're probably going to be okay. But if you go into it with just like, well, I've done this book and I'm going to put it on Amazon and I'm going to wait for the royalties to come in, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you talk about writing a book, what was the most difficult thing that you didn't anticipate about writing the books?
Probably the critique, because no matter what it is that you create, when you create it, most people, obviously there are people who really critique their own stuff really badly, But most of us, when we create something, we feel good about it. We're like, oh, I created it and it's awesome. It's my baby. And then when you put it out there for someone else, especially someone you respect, to read, and they come back and they're like, no, 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 and it's all marked up. You feel like you got kind of punched in the stomach a little bit at first. And you kind of want to vomit. But you really do. I remember. Because I remember I wrote my first book and I finished the first draft the day before this big conference that I was going to. And I hit the end, and I remember in my brain going like, I know people talk about needing a second draft, but I don't need it. This is perfect as it is. And then getting the critiques back and wanting to throw up because I'm just like, oh my gosh. And then learning all of the things that I just didn't know. There were so many things that I had no idea about. And then spending the next year and a half going to critique groups and learning to love critiques and learning to love when someone comes back and says, hey, I'm not getting this part, or this was really beautiful, or seeing when your work inspires people. So I think for me, it was the critique and getting past that point where it stung to where I ate it for breakfast and was just like, yes, give me whatever the problems are. I need to know because I can't fix them otherwise.
Yeah. You have to, that's great. You have to learn to love the critiques.
Yeah.
Because you're too close to the information. First of all, you understand the story because you're in the story, but you're trying to convey it to somebody else. So,
well, I think that critique aspect kind of it works in any type of business. If you are open to critique and you understand that even though you created something or you did something and it may have been to the best of your ability, there's always room for learning. And if you're in a safe space, or in a space of people that you respect, and you ask for that critique and you actually just listen to it and say, they're not doing this to hurt me or anything, your end product is going to be so much better. Like I always use the example of Pixar. Pixar, obviously, they produce amazing movies. Some of the best movies of the past 30 years are Pixar movies. But they have a mantra that is fail as fast as you can. And so what that means is that when they're starting a project and they're working on it, they have all of their creatives in there. And they're trying to get past the problems as fast as humanly possible so that they can produce something good. So they critique and they hit, and they're like, this isn't working. And everyone is very open and they're challenged. And so then their work comes out better. And obviously with Pixar, it's proven by what it is that they produced.
Yeah. Yep. That's awesome. Well, I got Joseph Stepke's listening, and Joseph is a crazy superhero fan. Now, I have to ask you, for Joseph, who is your favorite superhero?
Superman. Don't even have to think about it. You can see, right?
What do you say about that, Joseph? What do you say about that, Joseph? Yeah, let's see in the comments what Joseph thinks about that, because I think he thought Joseph's got a little different attitude about that. He is Team Batman.
Okay, well, but right here is an entire Batman shelf, so at least I represent. I love Superman and Batman. I love all. So I have Marvel shelves, and I've collected comics since I was 9 years old, and I've collected, Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, X-Men, basically everything you can imagine. I've collected and have represented in my action figure collection because I just love that medium. But yeah, Superman is the number one. In fact, I probably shouldn't say this since Joseph is listening, but the older I get, the less I like Batman because I'm at the point where I'm just like, dude, get over it, man. Just get some therapy. You have billions of dollars. You can do a lot of good with that without beating people up. Heal yourself. So it's like, as a kid, I'm like, Batman's cool. And as an adult, I'm like, dude, Batman, just go to a therapist. So yeah.
Yep, that's funny. So he said he needs to connect with you and show you the Batcave.
Oh, so that's sweet. Oh, if he's got like a Batman man cave.
Yeah, he's got a Batcave. He's not kidding.
Batcave. Now that is awesome. That okay, Joe. I want to see it. Yes, that sounds awesome.
Yeah. So you guys will have to connect because he's not kidding. He does have a bat cave, and he will have to show you his Batman suit that he uses. He had made for Halloween last year, or
Okay,
yes, or
yes,
year before.
I have.
It's off the
love
hook.
a good Batman suit. When I worked in TV, one of the things that we would do, we had a geek show, and we worked with different geek websites and stuff. And so we would go to like New York Comic Con, and we would be on the floor interviewing celebrities. And one of the things every year that we would do is that I would go down and I would interview cosplayers, and I would try and find the best costumes. And I've been to conventions all over the place, but man, there's something about New York and the quality of, because I guess in New York it's like, you know, geek culture isn't as big of a thing, and so they take it seriously. So their costumes were amazing, like you would not even believe it. Like the Batman costumes that they would have, and the Iron Man's, like actual like Iron Man suits with faces that opened up, the whole shebang. So
oh wow,
yeah, I love
something. That's something. Well, you guys will have to connect because I know it's a passion of Joseph's, that's for sure. So the writing and the collector part in you, and we're going to talk about growing, because really you grew up in video production, producing television shows, because you came out of college and you were doing that. So I mean, it's a lot different in a production environment like that. And I mean, production, and you got to do a show a week or it's a lot different than I'm going to make a documentary on, you know, the history of the world or whatever the heck it is. So what did you really learn in that, where you have that ka-chunk, I got to put a show out every week, that really taught you things that help you now?
For me, I learned to love the deadline. I learned to look and say, okay, I've got 7 days to produce that next half-hour show, and then supervise the production of, you know, potentially 2 other half-hour shows.
Yeah.
And so it taught me, A, to love that deadline, and B, to understand that creativity, like constraints, be they time constraints or money constraints, force you to be more creative. And so if we looked and we had a problem, and we said, okay, well, it doesn't matter. This problem crops up. Let's say, you know, it's a Wednesday, and that show has to be done and out by 1 p.m. on Friday. So there's suddenly a problem on Wednesday. Well, I can't just say, hey, I can't. Oh, well, it's just broken, or a piece, you know, we weren't able to shoot that we had scheduled. It was going to be on that weekend's show. I couldn't just say, oh, well, we're going to have black in the show. There's going to be a whole section of 2 minutes of black. You had to find solutions, and you had to be creative about those solutions. And so when those things would crop up, it would just be like, okay, well, there is no such thing as failure in this circumstance. We have to find an answer, and we have to be creative. And oftentimes what we would come up with in those crunch times would be so much better than if we had 6 weeks to figure it out. Somehow the ideas would be so pure, and the execution so just like flowing with the creativity, that sometimes those ended up being our most popular pieces that we had ever done. And so I look at those kind of constraints. I look at deadlines, and I look at problems as just creative solutions. You think around it, fix it, and you move on. Because I think too many times, if you're not in that situation and you don't have those constraints, things can sometimes just be less creative and thus less good. Like I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Serenity. It's a Joss Whedon movie based off of the television show Firefly that he did. It's a really good movie, but I was watching the special features, and he talked about how they had this big idea of what they were going to do with one of these vehicles that they had. And when they got in, they just didn't have the budget. They could not create it in real life. And so they had to get very creative very fast. And what they ended up coming up with to fix that problem was so infinitely better than what they originally had that it became the hallmark of the movie. And so I just ended up loving those constraints and realizing that they forced me to be more creative. And when I was forced to be more creative, the end result was better.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Joseph agrees. He says that New York and San Diego are the cons to go to. So yeah. Well, that's a great point, because, you know, some of the best things were created out of necessity rather than long planned, thought out processes. That's for sure. and the creativity, the forced creativity really comes up with some unique solutions once in a while.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, that's cool. So as you looked at this, what were the shows again that you were producing?
So our primary show is called At Your Leisure. It's an outdoor
Yep.
adventure show on ABC. Everyone has seen it at least once, like they'll have come across it and seen it. But it was all outdoor adventure. It focused primarily on the Western United States,
Yep.
but we would go all over and do whatever we wanted, you know, if it was in the outdoors. And so that was very fulfilling. Then we also did a public affairs show called County Seat that was all about local government. We did a couple of geek culture shows. We did numerous documentaries. We were always just doing different things,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was a very creative environment. It was really fun for that. But yeah, the main show was At Your Leisure, and that was the one that I like to focus on more than even the geek shows because it offered so much opportunity to go out and do cool stuff that most people never get to do.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit because you and I have talked off camera about your show a little bit. So, I mean, Western U.S. What are your top 3 places where people should see in the Western U.S.?
Oh, Western U.S. Geez.
Or just Utah if you just want you to do Utah.
Okay, Utah. Okay, so if we're talking Utah, the Wedge is one. It's kind of like a mini Grand Canyon. When you arrive there, at least I was when I saw it the first time. I was really surprised that I'd never heard of it before, because it very much does look like the Grand Canyon. This is a beautiful spot. You can camp right on it. There's a river at the bottom of it. A very beautiful, beautiful area. So that for sure would be one. Whitewater rafting the Colorado River between Moab and Height Marina, through Cataract Canyon. That is an experience that I cannot hype up enough. You're going through some of the nastiest rapids in the Western United States. And it is cool. Plus, you're basically in the Grand Canyon because you're not technically in the Grand Canyon. It doesn't start until you get to Height, but you're in these canyon lands with these massive canyons all around you as you're going down this river. It is so cool. It is such an amazing experience. And third, let me think for a second what the third one would be. Probably the San Rafael Swell. It's kind of in the area of the Wedge. The Wedge is a part of it, but the Swell is basically just an uplift of red rock that goes on for like 50 miles. And it's an area of slick rock canyons and slot canyons. And there's Goblin Valley. If you've ever heard of Goblin Valley, that's a part of the Swell. Just an absolutely spectacular landscape where you can go off, and if you want an ATV or if you want a Jeep or if you want to hike, you can go out and you can find places where you're the only person within 20 miles or 50 miles. Have that type of experience and just camp and go and explore. You'll find arches that, maybe you're the only person in the last 5 years who have seen it. That type of thing.
That's the thing that I really enjoy about the Western United States. Well, in Utah, especially because there's not a ton of people in Utah in the places that you're talking about. And it is, you can go to places where there literally have not been people looking at the same stuff that you've looked at for years in certain places. And it's not that far when you're talking about these places. What are they out of Salt Lake City?
The San Rafael Swell, like the primary access point, like if you're to go out of Farron, it's only about 2 hours from Salt Lake.
Yeah, see, it's like you're not driving 12 hours to get to some place. So that's really something. So as you're producing these videos, you're deciding that the production company, they're doing their production company thing, they're going off on their road, and you decided to you're going to be writing books and you're going to be doing video work for people now. So what do you think really carried over into the video work that you love doing now and helping people tell their story with video?
For me, what I always loved the most was the personal stories. I loved interviewing people and talking about their stories, whether it had to do with the area where we were, where we were adventuring, or if it had to do, if we were filming for the Geek Show and it had to do with their love of comic books or whatever it was. It was that personal story that always resonated with me. Because yes, I love movies. Obviously, I love movies and I love novels and I love all of that stuff. But all of those are manufactured. You create it and you try and create it as well as you can so that you create an emotional experience with people. But there's something about a story that is real, that is that person's story, and only they can tell it, that always really just got to me. And helping them tell it in a beautiful way was just, it filled me up. And so when I was like, okay, I need to leave and start my own thing, that was the part of the video that I wanted to do. I didn't want to do, just straight up commercials and the glossy and all of that stuff. I wanted to sit down with people and I wanted to help them tell their stories and have me ask the right questions and get them comfortable so that they could tell an emotional story and then put it together so that it instantly resonates with people, whether it's a client or a customer or whoever it is. Because just like we're talking about that first couple of years of being a business owner and you feel like you're a failure and all of that stuff, every business owner has been through that. Like maybe there's 1/10 of 1% that just everything worked out and it was wonderful. And they're like, oh, it was easy. The other 99.9% of us, we all went through those times where we were like, I'm 2 weeks away from closing my doors. I don't know what to do. And we made it through. And when you tell that stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that really touches people because you're telling something that's 100% true and you lived it. And it's not something that's secondhand. You're giving it to your customers. You're giving it to the people that you want to work with, or that whatever that relationship is. But you're able to tell it and then have it be condensed, in a video format so that it's told well. But for me, it resonates so much. It hits people and they're like, wow, and you can have, by the end of one of those videos, someone who has no idea who that person was and feel that emotion, that they're feeling the emotion and going like, wow, I had no idea. But that's the power of a good story. It's the power of good storytelling, of being able to know, okay, what to cut and what to keep in and what to put together and how to bridge it and put together that piece that tells that story in a way that is entertaining and emotional and just makes people feel emotional. I love when I'm working with a client and they get emotional watching their own story because they're realizing in that moment that their story was worth telling. And I think that so many of us have that problem, that we don't feel that our story is worth telling, whether it's a business story or a personal story. And in truth, those stories are always worth telling because they represent our life. They represent our existence. And when we share those, when we put them out there, it just makes the world a better place. It makes it a richer place when we share those stories. So that's why I gravitated toward that on the video side, is because I loved it. And I felt that was more needed than another commercial,
Yeah. Oh, no doubt. I mean, because when you say that, I can't tell you, I don't think there's ever been a business owner or, we just put a parent for, I don't care. There's just, doesn't have stories that are worth telling, because you talk about business owners and there's so many of them that, as you said, they may seem ultra successful today, but they can go back to a point where they were sitting there and saying, I didn't know if I was going to do it, or I was 2 pennies away from having to say I'm done. And they did, like you said earlier, they said they didn't give up long enough that it turned around and they made it through. But telling those stories, but the power of good storytelling and then your skill to take those different pieces of video, because we tell these stories, and while yes, in the entirety they're good, as you want to turn those into a video that really touches people, there's a lot of art in that, to be able to take, like you said, and splice and bridge and the different things you were talking about.
Yeah, because you've got to be able to, like, let's say you interview somebody for 45 minutes and you've got to get a 4-minute piece out of that, which is pretty standard. You've got 1/10 of, that's actually going to be seen. But it's going through and picking the most powerful moments and putting them together, and then allowing the story to tell itself by just truncating it. Like my mentor, Chad Booth, who is the owner of the production company, he told me very early on when I was writing stories, said the problem with like news, like television news, is that the reporters tend to always have their eye on, the anchor's desk. They're always, okay, this is just a way station for me to become something else. And so they tended to take their stories and the interviews that they were doing for those stories and making themselves the star. And so they would take the most important quotes for themselves. So for example, if they're interviewing someone and the guy said, oh, the fire just started in the kitchen and exploded and I ran out. Well, the reporter would take the kitchen exploded and then it goes to the guy and I ran out. They take the most important part.
Yeah.
The key to a good story is allowing the subject to have those powerful moments. And then if you're able to see what those moments are as you're going through the video and put those together, well, then you have a really powerful video that then just makes the subject look like a really good storyteller.
Yeah.
But it then condenses that and tells a story that just has all of those really exciting moments.
Yeah. I bet. So as you're doing this, what are some of the things that you just really love about being able to do it?
I love sitting down with someone and just going through the interview. And because most of the time people are somewhat trepidatious about being on camera in any way, shape, or form. It is uncomfortable. You feel very naked because you're just there. You're on, people can really stare at you and see everything. And so people get uncomfortable. So I love sitting down and helping them get comfortable just through the first few questions and smiling and until they start getting comfortable and realizing, okay, the camera's over here. They're not looking at the camera. They understand, okay, this is a conversation and the camera is just a voyeur who's watching us. And then they start to just loosen up. And then I know what kind of questions to ask and I listen very intently to what they're saying so that I can follow up. And when you do that, people just start to really share. And when you get to that moment of sharing, it becomes a very just intimate experience because they're sharing things that sometimes no one on earth knows other than them. And they're sharing it with me as I'm sitting across from them. And it's really, really cool. Like about 12 years ago, I decided to do a family documentary just of my family. I come from a large family. We grew up in Southern California. And so I wanted to do this. I had the idea one day. So I interviewed all of my siblings and my parents and sitting with my dad, you know your dad, you talk to him, you do all that stuff. And I'm sitting with him, just asking these questions and just as I would with any other subject.
Yeah.
And I was able to learn things about my dad and about his relationship with his parents that I had never heard, that my mom didn't even know about, that he was opening up and sharing with me in that moment on camera, about where everyone is just like, when we were watching it, once it was done, my family was like, I had no idea. Like so that's just such a wonderful moment when you're in that interview and people are opening up and sharing things that they've kept locked away, and maybe never would have shared if they hadn't been in that situation.
Well, yeah. I mean, some of this stuff is like when you're doing it with business people, I mean, they don't want to tell their spouse that it's really this close. They don't want them to worry. There's just so much of that just stays internal. And the same thing is with your father. I'm sure there was a lot of things that he may have even forgotten about.
Yeah.
That didn't come up until you were asking those questions. And I bet that was really something for your family to be able to experience all that and share that.
Well, yeah, it was really special. I'm very proud of how it turned out. And it gave me sort of an excuse to chronicle all of that stuff. And I was able to learn things about my grandparents, like my grandmother, when she was in the second grade, running up on the roof and seeing the Wright brothers fly by, because she grew up in the South, and my grandfather going into the Navy at the age of 16 because he had run away from home and working on a battleship and was strong enough that he could load the big rounds. He could palm one and throw it into the barrel and just do that one after the other. You hear those sorts of stories where you're just like, Oh my gosh. And they become then a part of you. Because so like my grandpa was my grandpa and I loved him. But now I have those stories that would have died with him that now
Yeah.
I have and can be shared. And yeah, so it was really special to be able to go through that.
You really bring up something because, and maybe it's just because I'm old enough to realize this, but I mean, I can remember faintly when we got the first television. And that's not, I mean, we lived in the country. We didn't live in the city, so it was a little different. But, today with video everywhere, everything's on video. It's a completely different situation than it was 50 years ago. Because, do you think that because video is so prevalent now and so easy to do that we're actually capturing more of those things? Or do you think because it's so common that we still are missing them?
I think I think it's a mixture of the two. Because there's so much, it tends to sometimes lose its value.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when we would film stuff for the television show, you'd have a guy who would put a GoPro on top of his helmet and go ride a motorcycle. And you come back and say, oh, I filmed the whole thing. And my thought was always like, you're never, ever, 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 ever going to watch that because it's super boring. There's no emotionality to it. And so much of our life becomes that. It just becomes, well, there's all this noise, there's all this video that we've taken or photos or whatever that we never go back. It's taking all of that stuff and putting it into something that's digestible, that you're going to go back to again and again and again. Like with my family documentary, it ended up being an hour and 20 minutes long. So it was long. It was a long documentary. But that's something that once every 5 years, someone will be like, hey, we should watch that. And you pop it in, and there's encapsulated in that hour and 20 minutes, 60 years of history.
Yeah.
And it's just, the highlights. But that's one thing that when we get so much volume of video, it tends to lose its meaning unless we take the things that are really important and we put them together. And then we have something that we can look back on. It's like having 10,000 photos. You're not going to look through 10,000 photos. But if you take 100 of those best photos and you put them into a photo album, you're going to revisit those. And those photos will then have power and represent more than those other 10,000 photos.
That's a great point. It's a great way to think about it, I believe, too, because it is putting all this into a digestible format that's impactful. And what you're helping people do is take this, put it into that to really make the emotion and feeling come through.
Yeah, like think of it as a punch, right? If you punch, the force of your punch gets spread all the way through your fist. But imagine if you could focus that just in one little point right here. Well, if you could do that, you would be able to shatter brick with just the force of your punch. And that's kind of what you're looking at when it comes to video. If you're focusing it and putting it in that capsule, it will have, it'll be like a bullet that'll just blow through everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's been one of the most fun projects you've done recently that you can talk about if you can?
I worked a couple of months ago with a franchise, the Chick-fil-A franchisor, the owner of a couple of Chick-fil-A's. And it was a very simple project that we worked on. He wanted to, do a couple of videos. But he was one of the ones that really felt impacted by his own story. And it was interesting because he talked about how because now he's an owner of a fast food restaurant. And he talked about how when he was a teenager, when he first got the job, he thought he was too good for fast food. It wasn't what he wanted. And the only reason he took the job was because he was so intimidated by the guy who was taking his interview. That when he said, okay, can you start Monday? He just said yes. And that's how he got the job.
Oh, wow.
And that was really, really interesting just to see where he had come from and how that one decision had set him on a path, kind of like mine, where if I had heard back from the radio station before I heard back from the television station, who knows where I would be, because I would have taken it.
Yes.
It's those little moments. And when you find out about those moments in people's lives and you think, wow, what would their life have looked like if they had made that one different choice? And his was so cool because he had that one moment that had basically defined the rest of his life. And if he had said no, then he would have been completely different. We never would have met. And so that one stuck with me because of that, because it was just one of those things that was a defining moment. And he was able to share that. And it made me think in that moment. And then I used that as the crux of his video, and people loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, that is cool, because there are those defining moments. There are those in everyone's lives, I believe. And when you can share those, that is really cool, especially like that, when it was almost a chance meeting.
Yeah.
That had happened. Yeah. Cool. Very cool. Well, Stephen, or Steve, I say Stephen once in a while because you use that in your words.
If my mom's listening, you want to go with Stephen, but I don't think
okay.
Steve is.
Okay. So Steve, what's coming up? I mean, you're obviously a writer. Do you have some more books in the works? You got some books that are out. What do you got going on there?
I do. So I just put out a new book, but I'm working on some publishing deals. So you can only get it through paperback through me. You can't get it digitally or anything like that. It's called Dream Forgers. I'm very, very proud of it. I feel that it's probably the most impactful story that I've ever written, about shared consciousness and what happens if you know something in a dream state and people are willing to kill you in the real world in order to get it. So it's very thrilling. It explores consciousness, and I'm very, very pleased with it. So that one you can purchase on paperback through my website at stephenheumann.com. That's my author website. And I'm working on the sequel. I have 3 books in that series. So I'm working on the sequel now. And I'm just very excited. And then what I try to do is when I'm into a new series, I always try and have whatever my next thing is so that it can kind of percolate. And so when I finished the first Dream Forgers, I kind of sat down and spent a day going over ideas. And so I've got another series after this one that I'll start, that's called Postmodern Prehistory. And it'll have to do with so it'll be a lot of fun. It's going to be a very fun series, but it'll deal with time travel, but just in a little bit different, more humorous way. I'm not a big fan of time travel. I think it's a cheat oftentimes. And so I'll be coming from that perspective, and it'll be very, very fun. But yeah, so that's kind of what the future holds in that regard.
That's cool. That's cool, because because in your Gavin Baker series, you've got 3 books in that series.
Yeah, Gavin Baller. Yeah.
Or Gavin Baller, excuse me. I couldn't read my own writing here. But that sounds like a very interesting series too. Greatest actor, biggest disappointment. What was its biggest?
Yeah. He's the greatest actor in Hollywood, and as awesome as he thinks he is, he discovers he's in fact the biggest disappointment in the universe. And it's a great galactic adventure. Gavin's such a fun character. The 3rd book in that series, I'm incredibly proud of, because for me, if you're going to do a trilogy, basically you're telling a beginning, middle, and end in each of the books. And then each of those books represents the beginning, the middle, and the end. And so the 3rd book is always the most important, or in a case of a movie, the 3rd movie is always the most important one. And I am very, very proud of that book, because I wanted it to get you to a point where it twisted things a little bit, and you realize you may not have been paying attention to the right details throughout the first 2 books.
Oh man.
And so when you get to that point, like I had my editor, I've had readers that were just like, dude, when that happened, I sat back and was like, oh my gosh, I haven't been paying attention to the right thing. And it all made sense at that moment, which is what I wanted. I wanted it to be like, I didn't see the trick until it was too late. And now what's going to happen? So yeah, I absolutely love that series. And then I have a few standalones. I have Paper Heroes, which is my first novel. That's a standalone. Transfused is a standalone. Both of those are sci-fi thrillers. And then I have a compilation of my own novellas and short stories in Retooled, which is all dark sci-fi retellings of lesser-known fairy tales. And so the great thing about owning my own business and owning my own author business and publishing everything myself is that I can concentrate on writing what I want.
Yeah.
and then the fans arrive. It's not like, oh, well, this is what's popular, so I have to write this. I can say, this is what I want to write, and this is what I'm excited about, and the people will join me.
Yeah.
So that's been really fun. And then I have a couple of novellas that are about, quarter-sized novels. You can read them in about 4 hours. But one of them is a violently heartwarming Christmas carol called The Santa Squad. And that's a dark comedy. And then the other one is called Station Zarahemla, which is about war on a space station. So I wanted to be very claustrophobic. And so
Wow.
I just I get an idea and I run with it, and it's fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I can see that creative side of you has to surely help. I mean, I feel it from you, and I've seen some of your finished videos, and they're really something. How you do really, as you said, you know how to take that story and condense it down into the impactful moments and really bridge it together into a heartfelt message.
Yeah, I
And
think that being a novelist, they feed into each other.
yes,
Because one, I'm making the world up basically. It doesn't exist, and then it does, and then I'm taking something that does exist, but I'm using the same principles that I would use for my novels when it comes to, okay, well, I got to worry about pacing, and I've got to worry about, because you don't want anybody to get bored. I've got to worry about what the highs and the lows are, and then picking the music so that the music follows those highs and lows. So that, because what you want when someone either is reading a book or watching a video is you want them to leave with an emotion. You want them to have felt something. That's why it was created. And so I want them to feel the emotion that needs to be felt from that piece. If you want them to leave feeling like $1 million after that piece, well, then that's what its purpose is. That's what you need to do. If you want them to feel sad or whatever the emotion is, you want them to leave with that and just be like, oh, And if you do that, then you've succeeded. You've done exactly what you set out to do, and you had an emotional impact on another person.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I think you summed it up well there, Steve. It is really about the difference in you and the videos that I've seen that you produce is really that emotional reaction that you create with those people that watch your finished work. So thanks so much for being here today. I appreciate you stopping by and sharing your collection. You're talking about writing and the video production, and just sharing your story with us today.
Well, thank you, David. This has been an absolute pleasure. This sort of stuff, talking about it and helping other people to kind of understand the importance of storytelling and them as a storyteller. If I would, talk to people and say, you are a storyteller and don't run away from it. Just because you might think that your story isn't worth telling, it definitely is. And whether you write it down or you record it or whatever, take the time to tell those stories, because if we don't tell them, once we're gone, well, that story goes with us and no one else is going to be able to tell it. So remember, your story is important.
Yeah. Wow. Steve, that's an awesome way to leave this. I don't even know what to say after that. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. So we had Steve Heumann here today. He was talking about a lot of things, but telling your story with video is the topic we were covering. How can people get a hold of you, Steve, if they want to talk to you?
Best way, you can go to my website, superhumancreative.com, with the spelt like my last name. So Heumann is Heumann, superhumancreative.com, or stephenheumann.com. That's my author website. Or you can just call me. My number is 801-953-6334. Feel free to give me a call. Send me an email at superhuman, again, spelled like my last name, superhuman01@gmail.com. If you forget the 01, it's fine. My wife is superhuman. She got the email before I could. So either way, it will get to me. But superhuman01@gmail.com. We can do a Zoom meeting. We can talk. And just kind of see what it is you want to do, what emotion you want your video to kind of portray, and what's going to be best for your business or for your family, whatever it is that the story you want to tell.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome, man. We had John Buglino in here, and he said he loved the conversation. Joseph's laughing. He, he's going, but Steve Heumann here with us today, talking about telling your story video. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks, Steve, for being here. We'll be back again next week. Thanks everyone. Bye, Steve.